Welcome to this evening's briefing on the Stage 2 applications of the Area Committee funding process. My name is Megan. I'm a Development Officer in the Community Resources team here. And with me is Julia, who's just been speaking, who is my Programme Manager in the Community Resources team. And as we said, any questions that come up throughout this briefing can be posted in the chat, and we'll visit them at the end of each section. And any we don't know the answer to on the spot, we'll take away and endeavour to get back to you as soon as possible. And yeah, just to note, this meeting is being recorded so that those who couldn't make it this evening can still get the information, which is why your cameras and microphones have been turned off, and we'll communicate via the chat. So yeah, we'll get into it. This diagram is just to show where in the CIL process we are. So everyone here should have been contacted to let them know that their Stage 1 proposal or their initial idea for a project has been progressed by your committee councillors to Stage 2 of the process. This means you should all be thinking about writing your full proposal over the next couple of months, which will then be considered by your area committee at meetings throughout October and November, where they'll decide which projects to fund. So the Stage 2 process has 3 elements, all of which you should have been sent in an email notifying you that you had been progressed. And these are the eligibility form, which is an online Microsoft form, the full project proposal form, which is a Word document, and then the Equalities Impact Assessment, which is also a bit of a big Word document. So yeah, all CIL projects are for the purpose of supporting development or to mitigate its impacts. These tend to either be delivered by a community organisation that has identified a need and made the proposal, or they are delivered by Bristol City Council on Bristol City Council land. So for community delivered projects, generally on private land, the applicant is responsible for completing all of those 3 elements of the proposal, including the sourcing of quotes, setting a budget, and that process requires you to consider the project's impacts on different equalities groups and develop your proposal in conversation with your community. And then for those projects that are taking place on Bristol City Council owned land and no permission has been given for a community group to carry out the works independently, Bristol City Council will be the ultimate delivery body. This means that that department, which is generally parks or housing, will complete all elements of the Stage 2 process, and they will independently work with the group or individual that made the proposal to ensure that the designs and outcomes match with the initial problem or idea. So the first part of the process is this eligibility form, as mentioned, and that is via an online form, and this is simply to ensure that all applicants meet the funding criteria of CIL. And as said, if your project is not being delivered by a community organisation itself, the Bristol City Council department does that. So for community VCSE organisations to receive funding, there are some basic governance and financial criteria that need to be met. This is because the CIL monies are public funds, and we have to ensure we are distributing them responsibly in a way that minimises risk. And that eligibility was also laid out as part of the Stage 1 process and is in all the guidance documents. So in the first instance, this means that the organisation must be a community interest company, a charitable incorporated organisation, a community benefit company, or a company with charitable status. And in 2024, the council kind of strengthened its due diligence processes to address any sort of financial risks and ensure that money is being spent responsibly. So there could be some people that have made applications that would have been eligible to receive funds before 2024, but no longer meet this new criteria. And so if you aren't incorporated as above and you can't receive funds under that, there are some options, which are receiving funding via an accountable body, so working with them to hold the money, or taking out trustee indemnity insurance, which limits the risk to individuals holding the money. And so that's the first stage, and I'm going to hand over to Julia now to go through the next process, which is the EQIA, the Equalities Impact Assessment.
Thanks, Megan. Okay, so creating a meaningful equalities impact assessment. So why do we use an equalities impact assessment? So this is to ensure that projects are useful and fair to all communities, especially those with protected characteristics, to identify and understand the potential impacts, those that are positive or negative, on different groups, to equip decision makers with the evidence needed to make informed, equitable choices, to highlight existing inequalities and barriers such as structural discrimination or underrepresentation, to identify and guide how you might make a project more inclusive and accessible. And whilst they're not legally required, they are a good working tool. And as we will talk about later on, you can really use this tool to explore how to shape your project. So thinking about and understanding the impact or likely impact of a project on different people because of their characteristics and circumstances, we talk about characteristics. The Equalities Act 2010 make it unlawful to discriminate against someone on the grounds of these 9 protected characteristics. So that's age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage or civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex, and sexual orientation. And thinking about disability, particularly, we're using the social model of disability. So that is describing people as being disabled by barriers in society, not their impairment or difference. So looking at these groups, we're particularly wanting to highlight the specific equalities groups who historically they've experienced the greatest inequality and barriers. And these are named subgroups within that broader categories of the protected characteristics. So thinking about young people between 18 to 24, older people, 55 plus, women and girls, disabled people, ethnic minorities, LGBTQIA plus people. And when we're thinking about this, we're particularly also thinking about what different kinds of disability, what ethnic backgrounds is a project working with, and how people with combined characteristics, so intersectional, for instance, young women, might have particular needs or experience particular kinds of disadvantage. So part of the Equality Act 2010 that only applies to public bodies is the public sector equality duty. So Bristol City Council has a duty to eliminate unlawful discrimination, harassment, victimisation or any other conduct that is prohibited by or under this Act, advance equality of opportunity and foster good relations. So within this duty, we need to ensure that all third-party spend, such as the area committee funding, that we need to ensure providers or delivery organisations operate in accordance with the Equality Act 2010 and the public sector equality duty. And part of this is that we want to work together to create a more inclusive and equitable city through actively using EQIAs. So things to think about before completing the form. The process of completing the EQIA can be an opportunity to identify issues and work to remove barriers. So thinking about which people in equalities groups might be disproportionately affected, what could go wrong if we don't consider their needs and circumstances, what could we do to make things fairer? So you're thinking about the bigger picture in your area. What are the existing issues that you know that might have a bearing on your proposal? Okay, so this is what the EQIA form you will have received looks like. It can look quite confusing, a bit overwhelming when you first look at it. So we've filled in an example to work through here with some key things to consider when completing it. And this example relates to a youth club building. So the first column is pre-filled with each of the protected characteristics, and you only need to fill in the row relating to each of the characteristics your project will have an effect on. And these are being selected based on the 2010 Equality Act and the agreed equalities groups within these. The next column, 1.1, asks you to detail any positive benefits your project will support from the group of people. And this means the opportunities for inclusion. What is your proposal positively doing? What are the benefits in terms of engagement and providing better opportunities? How are you achieving these? State what evidence you can provide to measure this. Then column 1.2 asks how your project will contribute to eliminating discrimination. Think about if there's traditionally a lack of awareness of the barriers some groups face, and that could be physical or structural, that your project could help address. Column 1.3 and 1.4 ask you to consider the intersection of different equality groups. So in this example, they've identified that while their group is a place for people across communities to get to know each other, as their group delivers active groups for young people, disabled people may struggle to participate. So this highlights any potential barriers to inclusion that the organisation could work to address in their future work. So 1.4 is an opportunity to consider how these identified barriers could be reduced. Really helps them think about focusing on making those inclusive and accessible. As you can see in this example, the group have shown that they've really considered their impact, and exercise has allowed them to highlight areas for greater inclusion. When filling out the form, avoid giving short or undetailed answers. This could show a lack of consideration and understanding of the impact your project really can make on the different groups in your community. Giving specific answers shows that you've really made an effort to foster cross-community inclusion. And so while your project may be open to all, writing just this means you haven't considered the needs and barriers that different groups can face. And this is a really good tool to really think about that in more detail and really describe your project to us. And then the groups that may not be impacted by the project. So even though there are going to be groups that you don't have impact on, it is important to recognise and tell us. And so, for instance, in this example, the youth club may have no direct impact on older people, but by engaging in a youth club, young people can become more connected to their community and could work to limit any negative impact on older people in the location, fostering community cohesion. Okay, so we've just got a moment now for any questions on the initial EQIA or any of the slides before that. If you just want to put any questions in the chat.
Next step is the third part of the proposal, which is the full project proposal form, so kind of the meaty part of the proposal. And so we are going to work through the proposal form. So it might help if you sort of have a copy nearby, because what I've tried to do is track each question referenced with the point I'm making, just to make it a bit clearer, because there's quite a lot of detail and I wanted to work through it in order. So yeah, section 1 of stage 2 proposal form is kind of the overview of the project, it's summary, and it's kind of just the details of your project, and it's for us to establish the funding source you are applying to. By this point, you will generally know if you're applying for CIL or section 106. It will be majority CIL, as section 106 is tied to a specific development with criteria for how it needs to be spent. Section 2 is about funding eligibility. So as you know, CIL needs to be spent on projects that support development or mitigate its impact. And then if you are applying for Section 106 funds, that eligibility is site specific, and the criteria for the 106 funds you are applying for can be found on our website there if you click that link. And then the next section in Section 2 is about describing success. And this is where you tell us about what you hope to achieve by completing your project. And this is quite an important section because upon completion, they're the points we monitor the project against, those expected outcomes. So it's good if you can share how you'll demonstrate success at the monitoring stage with kind of defined expectations and the impacts your project will have on your local community. So Section 3 is all about equalities, inclusion, and the public sector equality duty, which obviously Julia has covered quite a lot. But this is really important in this section as well, because CIL funds are devolved to area committees to ensure that community voice can shape improvements and placemaking. And it's an important opportunity for all to be involved in decision making. And our communities are diverse, which is why ensuring all project proposals represent a wide community voice and being able to demonstrate that is really valuable. So this section is an opportunity for you to show how your organisation, your project has considered that local voice, and it has been part of the proposal throughout, and how it's going to have a positive impact on all of our communities. So getting into each part of Section 3, it begins by establishing if your organisation is equalities led, which you will have been asked at stage 1 as well, and that just refers to the leaders of your organisation. The next point is about accessibility, and that is in there because all infrastructure projects, which CIL they are all infrastructure, should be fully accessible for disabled people and not serve in any way to further exclude those with mobility or accessibility requirements. So this section can be viewed as a chance to kind of show how you've considered every member of your community and how you've taken different requirements into your project plan. And then detailing how your project proposal has emerged and the ways in which residents have been able to shape its development can help decision makers know that they are serving their whole communities. So that's a place for you to consider which stakeholders you've involved and if they are representative of your area, how you are speaking to people and perhaps who you haven't been able to speak to. And kind of demonstrating that you've used a bit of an asset-based community development approach, which is where you acknowledge what assets and strengths there are in your community and work to build on those, can be really important. And if you are ever interested in finding out more about that, our community development team run connecting neighbourhood sessions, which are really interesting for any community organisation. So we can direct you to them. So then Section 4 is all about the kind of logistical details of the project being delivered and ensuring it's viable, which is quite important. So land ownership, impacts the permissions needed, and the ultimate delivery body of the proposal. And we've kind of touched on some of the nuances within that already. But by this point in the process, the delivery body of the project should have been determined and land ownership clarified. A good starting point for that is to look on Pinpoint, which is linked here, to check who owns the land, and then you know which permissions are needed. But as I say, that should have been established by now. If you feel it hasn't, it'd be really good if you could get in touch with us. So yeah, permission in that section does refer to where proposals on BCC land have been given kind of the authority and permission to lead on a project in partnership with them, kind of if they have the capacity to do so. And then that final section there is about us being sure that the organisations we are funding have the capacity to successfully deliver the projects proposed. So it asks a bit about the history of projects you have delivered, just so that we aren't setting organisations up to fail and we know who would need extra support and things like that. So yeah, the next part of Section 4 is about the project delivery timetable. So we initially ask for a breakdown of key milestones you expect to achieve. This is so that we can see the work needed to take place before the funding can be released and if there will ever need to be any delay there. And then we can sort of present the key elements of the project to your committee. And this can help when assessing the viability, as it'll inform the expectations around funding schedules and things like that. So this will also impact our monitoring process and allow that viability to be considered. And as it says there, we are aiming to raise awareness of the CIL funding process and the opportunities it can bring to influence decision making and the wider sort of ripple effect impact that can have. So our team being able to know any events or key dates, such as like volunteering days or exciting parts of the project you're delivering, can help our process of getting progress updates, which we do every 6 months, and can also help us produce better communications and improvements that our team would like to make. Yeah, so that would just really support us, and that'd be really nice. So then the final section relates to laying out the project budget, which is kind of one of the most important bits, I imagine. So it's really good to break down all the expected costs. And if your proposal allows, so the budget you've been allocated at stage one, it can be a good idea to include some contingency to allow for inflation or any unexpected costs. Then the next section refers to match funding, and having that secured can help those making the decisions consider projects that are best placed to succeed. And then the next bit kind of is really valuable, which is asking if your project can be broken down into smaller chunks. So area committees have set budgets which vary across the city and receive quite a large number of proposals. So to help this process and increase the likelihood of receiving funding, breaking your larger projects down into stages or phases, clearly sort of outlining what you can be achieved each stage with phased refunding could mean that you get funding for elements of your project, even if they can't sort of support you with all of it. And yeah, it is your responsibility to source adequate quotes and include that in your application as kind of evidence that the project is viable. And then considering ongoing revenue and maintenance costs kind of shows that it's sustainable, and the council is not in a position to support projects with undefined maintenance attached. It would just be setting up a project to not continue in the community and not have added value. And then the final point is about the schedule of the funding. So as we've mentioned in the chat as a response to someone's question, any funding over £40,000 will have to be paid in instalments, which can, if that does apply to your project, taking that into consideration when planning the project around its key milestones could allow those payments to align with that. And then it's always good to be aware that payments can take some time to be drawn down. So in planning payment schedules, allow a bit of a time buffer for when you're asking compared to when you want it to be delivered. And so that's the whole form. I hope that has taken it through in some order if you have the form next to you, and if not, that you can refer back to as these slides will be sent out. So then once you've filled all those 3 forms out and you've got all the necessary attachments, so the EQIA, all your quotes, all your evidence of eligibility, send them to your area committee inbox. So that's not the community's inbox, but your kind of designated area committee inbox. And that needs to be done by the 5th of September. So yeah, that's it from me. I'm going to hand back over to Julia to kind of wrap up and give any information on where else you can get support before we get into some questions and discussion.
Thanks, Megan. So here's some extra useful information and additional support to help with your application. As you can see, there's several links there on different elements that will help, particularly in terms of the asset-based community development. So you've got a link to the team at the bottom, and also some really good links around disability and equality information and data. To help with your application as well, there's several different people that you can reach out to help support you. So we have a link here to find your local councillor. There's a link here also to find your local community development practitioner. There's a map there so you can go to the specific area and find out who that is. And also you've got your community connector organisations, a link there as well. So they can all be really good avenues of support there for you. And of course, any other questions that you might have, please do contact us at communities@bristol.gov.uk. Yeah, thanks very much for spending an hour of your evening with us tonight. Thank you,
everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.